Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be using forms in our React application in order to implement adding new notes in our Notes app. So we're going to head over to our Notes app. Now to get our page to update every time a new note is added, we need to add state to our notes. So we're going to define a state variable called notes and set notes. And we're going to set it equal to useState, and we're going to give it an initial value of props.notes. We're using props here because we want to avoid ambiguity since our state variable is also called notes. So in our app parameters, we're going to pass in props. Now if we wanted to start with an empty list of notes, we would simply pass in an empty array to our useState function. Under our UL tag, we're going to add a form tag, and in here we're going to have an input tag which is going to take inputs from the user, and we're also going to have a button of type submit, and it's going to have the text add. Now the form tag has an onSubmit attribute which takes a function. Now this function is going to run when we press the submit button. So we're going to call it save note. So we're going to go ahead and define this function. So we're going to have const save note. And as a parameter, we're going to get an event. So this event is a description of everything that happens when we submit our form. Now the first thing we need to do here is call event.prevent_default. Here, the prevent default function prevents the default behavior of submitting a form. The default behavior of a form is that once we click a submit button, a request is sent to our backend and it's going to cause a page reload. But in our case, we want to handle the form on the client side. So that's why we're going to prevent the default behavior. Now, the next question is, how do we actually get the text from the input element? To accomplish this, we're going to be using controlled components. So the input tag currently is an uncontrolled component, meaning that the element itself manages its own value. So what we mean by control component is using JavaScript to control and monitor what's in the input field instead of letting the input field manage itself. So to do this, we're going to define a new state. We're going to call it new note and set new note, and we're going to set it equal to the useState function, and we're going to pass in a text. Let's just pass in a new note. The one thing we forgot to do is import the useState function, so we're going to import useState from React. Now we're going to use the new note variable in our input tag. So in our input tag, we're going to define the value attribute, and we're going to pass in our new note variable. Now we're going to save our file and open the terminal, and we're going to navigate to the collections folder, and we're going to cd into notes, and we're going to run npm run dev. Now we're going to go to the browser. As you can see, the value of the input field is a new note, but there is one problem. If you try to edit this text, it won't let you. So if we look at the developer console, we get a hint to what is wrong. So if we read out the warning, it says you provided a value prop to a form field without an onChange handler. Now, since we've taken control of our input field, we ourselves need to define what happens when a user tries to change the text in the field. In our case, we only provided what the initial value should be, but we also need to handle what happens when the user tries to change this initial value. And to do this, we're going to use the onChange handler. So in our input tag, we're going to have an onChange attribute, and we're going to pass in a function. Let's call it handle node change. And now we're going to define this function. So we're going to have const handle node change, and it's going to have an event as a parameter since it's part of our form, using the event parameter, we can actually access the value that the user inputs into the input field. So in order to get that, we're going to use event.target.value. So this is going to be whatever text is inside the input field. So we're going to pass this to our setNewNote function. So now we're actually handling the note change. That means whenever the input field is changed, we're storing it in the newNote variable. So now we can save our file and go to the browser. Now we can actually edit the text inside the input field. So that means we've successfully handled the note change. Once we've done that, we can go back to our saveNote function. And in here, we're going to create a new object. Since we've discussed that we don't directly edit a state variable, so we're going to create a new object called note object. And we're going to give it 3 attributes. So it's going to have a content attribute. And we're going to set the content to whatever the user inputs, and whatever the user inputs is stored in the newNote variable. Then we're going to have an important attribute. For now, we're simply going to generate a random important. So we're going to use the random function, and we're going to have a condition which says less than 0.5. So we're going to get a random number. If it's less than 0.5, our important attribute is going to be true. Otherwise, it's going to be false. And finally, we're going to give it an ID. For now, the ID is going to be the length of our notes plus 1. So it's going to be added at the end of our notes. Once we've created our note object, we're going to use the setNotes function, and we're going to pass in notes.concat, and we're going to concatenate our new object. Once we've done that, we want to clear the input field. So we're going to use the setNewNote function, and we're going to pass an empty string. So now we can save our file and go back to the browser. Now if we put in a text, let's say hello world, and we press on the add button, as you can see, our note gets added to our list. Finally, we're going to add one more functionality to our app, which is going to be a filter, which is either going to show all the notes, or it's going to show the notes which are important. That means their important attribute is set to true. So again, we're going to need another state called showAll, and set showAll. And we're going to set it equal to useState, and we're going to give it an initial value of true. Now we're going to define a variable called notes_to_show. And here we're going to be using the ternary operator. So if you don't know what that means, it simply means we're going to have a variable, and we're going to set it equal to a condition. Then we're going to have a question mark, then we're going to have a value, then we're going to have a colon, and we're going to have another value. So how this works is if the condition is true, then the variable gets assigned value 1, and if the condition is false, the variable gets assigned value 2. So using this, we're going to define our notes_to_show variable. So our condition is going to be the showAll state, and if this is true, then we want to set notes_to_show to our entire notes list. So we're going to set it to notes. But if showAll is false, then we want to use the filter function. So we're going to say notes.filter, which is going to give us the note parameter. And here we're going to have a return statement. If this return is true, then the note is going to be included in the filter. And if the return is false, the note is not going to be included in the filter. So we're going to pass in note.important. So if the important attribute is true, then the note is going to be included. If it's false, the note is not going to be included. Now down in our return statement, instead of passing in notes, we're going to pass in notes_to_show, which is the new variable we just created. And to control this variable, we're going to have a button. Now the text of this button is also going to be a condition. So we're going to be using the ternary operator again. So we're going to have the word show. Then in curly braces, if show all is true, that means all the notes are being shown. So we want the text important. If show all is false, that means all the important notes are being shown. So we want the text all. Now this button is going to have an onClick attribute. And since this function is simple, we're going to pass it in directly. So we're going to have a function, and every time the button is clicked, we're going to use the set show all function, and we're going to simply take the opposite of whatever the show all variable currently is. So we're going to use an exclamation mark, then show all. So if the show all variable is true, then pressing this button is going to make it false. And if the show all variable is false, pressing this button is going to make it true. So now we can save our file and go to the browser. As you can see, we have a show important button since currently all the notes are being shown. So if we press this button, then only the important notes are going to be shown. So this has been a lesson on using forms in our application. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel to show your support.